Hi, my name is Amy Murphy, and I'm the founder of Rehumanize International, a secular, nonpartisan organization dedicated to building a culture of peace and life. Today, we're going to be talking about war. Can you imagine being glad that it was cloudy yesterday because it meant that you wouldn't be bombed? Can you imagine living through air raid sirens day and night, so it was hard to work or even sleep? Can you imagine walking with friends, hearing the sirens and trying feebly to take cover, all before you see a flash of light and hear a blast? And suddenly, the ground 2 miles away is 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The bronze statue behind you is beginning to melt, and the roof tiles above you are beginning to fuse together. You black out from the pain and the blast. This is essentially what happened to 80,000 civilians in Hiroshima, Japan, on August 6, 1945, the day that the US dropped a nuclear bomb on a civilian center for the first time. It was one of the most brutal attacks that humanity had ever seen. Nuclear weapons set the stage for a new way of understanding war between nations, and therefore also set the stage for a new way of understanding peace. The nuclear threat is seen as the modern foundation of peace, or at least the lack of war. As David Trachtenberg, former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, said, "Nuclear deterrence is the bedrock of U.S. national security. Our nuclear deterrent underwrites all U.S. military operations and diplomacy across the globe. It is the backstop and foundation of our national defense." Increased military technology, particularly nuclear weapons, is often seen as a provocation against other countries, who often feel like they need to ramp up their own military technologies and weaponry in order to fight back against the possibility of nuclear war. More and more money, time, and talent are poured into the military-industrial complex year after year, making it hard for nations to back down from this seeming catch-22 situation. And even though the monetary costs are staggering, the human cost of war is even more horrific. "We don't do body counts," General Tommy Franks told reporters. His remark has been burned into the memories of our general consciousness because it demonstrated how easy it is to dehumanize those on the other side of war, to view human lives as purely expendable. War draws our eyes away from the human individual towards the bigger picture, making it easier for us to dehumanize, even if we're not the ones who are actually doing the attacking. This is an especially grave and especially difficult question when it comes to assessing civilian deaths from war. There is evidence to show that civilian deaths are increasing in modern warfare, but also that civilian deaths now outnumber the deaths of combatants in modern war. These lives are sometimes treated as if they have a literal cost. The US and other international forces often pay out a form of reparations or consolation pay to the families of those who have been killed inadvertently during war. Under the Foreign Claims Act, when there is an accidental death, civilians can submit a claim form asking for remuneration. While these payments are necessary in redressing the wrongs of war, they also reveal the dehumanizing way that the US military and other militaries around the world view civilian deaths. Quote, "The US cannot pay your claim because your brother's death was incident to combat," a note on one rejected claim stated. I am sorry for your loss, and I wish you well in a free Iraq. Even when these claims are accepted, the language is often still objectifying, as in one case where death of wife was listed under supplies and services, quantity 1. The cost of her life, just $2,500. This dehumanization and violence is part and parcel of modern warfare. But war-making wasn't always this brutal. Just in the past 125 years, man has revolutionized war, revealing man's inhumanity to man, to the point where now nearly everyone has been touched by war in some way, shape, or form. With the First World War in 1914, war-making shifted drastically, as deaths from the war topped 5 million in just the first year. Total war became the standard. Entire nations were mobilized to fight these brutal battles. Shifts included a selective service draft for the first time in the UK, women being recruited into the military, and whole industries being shifted to create the mechanisms of war. The creation of quick-firing artillery that could withstand recoil and be quickly reloaded, combined with the advancement of long-range shells, resulted in death and destruction like humanity had never seen before. Chemical weapons like chlorine gas were used for the first time ever in war, resulting in unprecedented death and disabling countless soldiers for the rest of their lives. With the invention of bomber planes, whole cities could be decimated with one air raid, and planes were fairly safe from being shot down because they were so far off in the sky. The most massive shift came with the creation of nuclear weapons. Albert Einstein had gone on the record to say that he was concerned that Nazis would create this hypothetical weapon first. His urging led the US to bring together a team called the Manhattan Project, led by Oppenheimer, who created the first nuclear weapons. On August 6, 1945, the Little Boy bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, decimating tens of thousands instantly. Though Japan had wanted to submit to a conditional surrender, making their emperor exempt from the possibility of war crimes because he was a religious figure, the US would not accept the conditional surrender. On August 9th, just one day after the Soviet Union decided to enter the Japanese front of the war, the US dropped the Fat Man plutonium bomb on Nagasaki. When all was said and done, both bombs killed over 120,000 Japanese people, most of whom were civilians. At the end of World War II, the United States had both nuclear weapons and over 2,000 military bases around the world. They were primed to be the global police. War had changed forever. War historian Bernard Brodie commented on this development, saying, "Thus far, the chief purpose of our military establishment has been to win wars. From now on, its chief purpose must be to avert them." War-making adapted in this modern era by relying less on states making proper declarations of war. However, the United States still enlisted men using a selective service draft to fight conflicts around the world. It was discovered that during World War II, on average, no more than 15% of the men had actually fired at the enemy. The best showing that could be made by the most spirited and aggressive companies was that 1 man in 4 had made use of his firepower. As Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman responded in assessing these statistics, these proved the simple and demonstrable fact that there is within most men an intense resistance to killing their fellow men, a resistance so strong that, in many circumstances, soldiers will die before they can overcome it. The Army didn't like this moral instinct. So, after World War II, they worked on creating training programs to train it out of their infantry. The Army took great steps to condition soldiers to be comfortable with dehumanization and killing. Prior to World War II, infantrymen had trained how to shoot their weapons by using standard round bullseye targets. However, after World War II, the Army began training using human-shaped silhouettes. Reflexive fire training conditioned these soldiers to bypass their moral reasoning by shooting first and asking questions later, before they could even consider the humanity of the man that they were shooting at. In the Korean conflict, 55% of infantry fired their weapons, and upwards of 80% in Vietnam. In modern conflicts, such as in Iraq, the fire rate is well over 90%, as the training soldiers receive works hard to condition the suppression of the innate instinct against killing. That fire rate in recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan has resulted in the deaths of over 480,000 people, including more than 6,900 US military. Despite the human cost, modern warfare is incredibly lucrative for weapons dealers. In 2018, over $1,822 billion was spent globally on military expenditures. $649 billion of that was spent by the US alone, accounting for 36% of global military spending for that year. Between 2001 and 2019, the US government approved the budgets for and spent around $260 billion a year on military spending. The US Department of Defense's budget is notoriously misleading, however, as funds for military, anti-terrorist, and defense endeavors are often categorized under Department of State spending and within other agencies. The modern wars in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iraq have cost the United States $6.4 trillion. This investment in the military-industrial complex grows more worrying as defense technology and weapons technology develops. This is nowhere more clear or more worrying than in the case of nuclear weapons spending. Global inventory of nuclear weapons, both deployed and undeployed, totals over 13,400 weapons, with over 1,800 of those on high alert, ready to be deployed at any moment. While most countries have only a few hundred weapons, both Russia and the United States have over 4,000 each, resulting in over 91% of the global nuclear stockpile being held by these two nations. War is rarely our only choice, and when it is our only choice, it is often because we have ignored every opportunity to achieve peace along the way. As a society, we have consistently prepared for war instead of preparing for peacemaking and diplomacy. Instead of focusing all of our attention and funding on militarization, we need instead to focus our energy on learning how to mediate conflict with as little violence as possible. There is no one simple solution. Rather, we must choose to reject violence over and over again. A first easy step towards limiting the opportunities for unjust war would be to defund the military-industrial complex. The fact that weapons manufacturers and military contractors have such a financial incentive to prepare us for war presents a massive conflict of interest with efforts for diplomacy and peacemaking. The movement for peace is a vastly underfunded grassroots effort. While the movement for war, funded by weapons manufacturers and military contractors, has the ear of our legislators in the halls of Congress. Some say that war and conflict are unavoidable. Others say that they're a natural part of human psychology. What gets abstracted in this is that war and conflict are, in the words of Thomas Nagel, relations between persons. So the question should not be, how much can I get away with? But rather, what should my response be to this human in front of me? What if I'm being attacked? What constitutes just defense? Have I exhausted all of my options before resorting to violence? War makes it hard for us to view others as humans. It's easier to view them euphemistically, as collateral damage. Euphemisms make war seem necessary and scientific, but what they really do is distract us from the dignity of all and our responsibilities to each other. We need to consider what are the ways of relating to each other, to other nations, that respect the dignity of all involved. War happens to humans and between humans. It isn't just some abstract theory or inevitable force. One moral system that is especially common in decisions regarding conflict is just war theory. This theory holds that war can be just, hypothetically, if it meets all of the following. It has a just cause, right intention, a probability of success, it is waged by a proper authority, it is a last resort, and its intention is proportional to the harms the war will cause. As with any ethical framework, how you apply it is often ambiguous, and leaders have often used this ambiguity to attempt to justify abhorrent action. Just war theory should never be used to attempt to justify a war ex post facto. We shouldn't confuse reflecting on our actions and the potential actions that lay ahead of us using a moral system with using that lingo to attempt to justify war crimes. One thing that must be stated is that nuclear weapons can never be tools of a just war. The only reason that nuclear weapons exist as a deterrent from war is because they pose the constant threat of mutually assured destruction. Think about it. Nuclear weapons only function as a deterrent if we're willing to use them against civilian city centers. But decimating whole cities of civilians is an inherently unjust action. It is intentional and aggressive violence on a massive and brutal scale. Because intentionally killing upwards of hundreds of thousands of civilians with a nuclear weapon is inherently unjust, retaining nuclear weapons in any form is contrary to human dignity and to peace. We may never do evil that good may come of it. We reject the use or storage of nuclear weapons merely because another nation has them. We should not allow the actions of other countries to dislodge our moral compass. Believing in a human-centered ethics in practice, we demand an end to the storage and use of all nuclear weapons. We also demand the abolition of the creation of any future nuclear weapons, with the understanding that our existing military technology should instead be oriented towards creating defense systems that could prevent nuclear weapons from ever touching down on American soil. As long as the United States and other nations maintain their nuclear arsenals, they are guilty of preparing for the use of indiscriminate and decimating force against civilian populations. They are guilty of preparing for war crimes. In order to build a peace with a strong foundation and end the stalemate of the nuclear arms race, we must abolish nuclear weapons. Though the United Nations passed the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which went into effect on January 22nd of 2021, none of the nuclear powers have adopted this treaty. To help with the anxieties of the nuclear powers in the process of decommissioning nuclear weapons, we wrote a white paper published back in 2016 called Toward the Abolition of Strategic Nuclear Weapons. This white paper created an outline for nuclear powers to gradually decrease the number of nuclear weapons in their control, eventually getting them down to zero. Ultimately, though, all foreign policy should be ordered towards peace, diplomacy, and the inherent dignity of every human being. To learn more about ways that you can get involved in our work for peace and human rights, you can find us at rehumanizeintl.org. On that website, you can find information about how to join a local chapter community of Rehumanize or how to start your own. These chapters are really integral towards building peace on the ground in the communities where you live. For updates, you can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at RehumanizeINTL. Thanks for watching. Peace.